Americans with Disabilities Act is very specific about issues of accessibility for all types of disabilities.
But how are we doing? It's good to hear the definitions.
You want to know how we're doing from a personal perspective?
Maybe you have a thought on
I think in terms of how we're doing is fair. Fair. I mean, certainly for some handicapped categories, for some disabilities, in some buildings, certain ones are being provided services that allow accessibility in order for the child to benefit. And in that very same building, another type of disability might not be served as well, if at all. And so I think it's very spotty. And here again, we go back to, we have to think in terms of quality. What is the quality of the experience for the child? And again, I'm not advocating segregation of children. I'm saying that every time we take a look at a program for a child, the accessibility of the program for a child, we have to take a look at what is the quality of this child's experience going to be. And if that multidisciplinary staffing conference decision is not truly focusing on this one child, but it's merely a meaningless exercise in filling out papers, then we are not going to end up with a quality experience for the child.
Quality is really linked to the teachers who are going to be teaching those children.
And a lot of times, the teachers really do not know how to teach children with a spectrum of disabilities. Teachers who don't know sign language, as was pointed out, who don't know how to teach children with hearing impairments, teachers who don't know how to teach children that have visual impairments, and also teachers who don't know how to make accommodations. So obviously we really need to know how to teach our teachers to teach those children. And we have had legislation that has been introduced for that in the state legislature. And yet there has been a lot of opposition to that legislation, to House Bill 3825, for instance, that just died in our state legislature because there was not enough support for it, and there was a lot of opposition. It was going to provide in-service training. In other words, teachers who are already there, who are already teaching in regular classes, specifically so that they would know how to teach the children with disabilities that are coming into their classes every day, so they would know how to teach them. And yet there was a lot of opposition from people that you would suppose would be backing that legislation, which was people who were supporting inclusion. So I don't understand why there was opposition to this, because as all of our leaders have said, at the national level, through Dr. Tom here, who is with the Office of Special Education Program, and also Judith Newman, who is the head of the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, and also people at the state level who are saying, teachers need to be trained, we need to have good teachers, and as everybody here has agreed, we need to have support for the students with disabilities in our regular classes. Well, for that, they all need to know what they're doing.
Matt, and then Alejandro.
What is clear is that the law has required that schools consider the least restrictive environment since 1975. What is now happening is that a variety of bills are being introduced into the legislature, ostensibly to protect children with disabilities, when the law already provides protection that requires training of teachers, when the law already requires individualized decision-making, when the law already requires that schools provide due process safeguards that allow parents to dispute placement decisions by school districts. And Charlotte, I think, and I, with all due respect, I think it's somewhat disingenuous to fault people who are supporting inclusion for raising concerns about that type of legislation, because in fact the federal law has since 1975 required school districts to provide training programs on best practices, including things like how to serve children with disabilities in regular education. And in fact, the federal law since 1975 has specifically mandated that regular education teachers receive instruction on working with children with disabilities. I think your comment really goes to a more difficult problem. And I think it's a sadness that what has happened in the dispute about inclusion is that legitimate fears, and I think they are legitimate fears, about children with disabilities being placed into regular education environments without support have become translated into opposition to the notion of inclusion per se. I don't think that inclusion, as I understand it from people who are proponents of inclusion, as I understand it from myself, would countenance children with disabilities being placed in a regular education environment without adequate support or without adequate training. The laws that exist already has provisions which describe the obligations of schools to meet that responsibility. The problem is not with the statutes. The problem is with the unwillingness of schools to implement those training procedures, to implement the provision of supports, and to reverse this decision-making process so that we focus on the regular education environment first and only consider more restrictive settings as a last resort.
Well, I think that that's what that law was meant to do, because it was a state law meant to facilitate the implementation of our federal law, right, for those teachers that are there now.
Okay, Alejandro, and then we'll turn here.
Dr., when you had started this particular series and talked about inclusion and accessibility and asked about it, and at least in my impression and from experience, it's pretty simple that you cannot have inclusion without accessibility. Cut it how you want. And that's what I was arguing, is that we want to do it, but the accessibility is not there. Yeah. And we have to raise it at saying, hey, we want to, however. And also, along with that line, I think it from a legal perspective, it's, you know, separate but equal is not right. And in essence, to continue the separate but equal, not legal.
All right, Sharon.
I want to say something about the inclusion, about the law. Back in 1975, I understand the law became effective for these restrictive requirements. Unfortunately, the subpopulation across the country will not be able to give them support to upset about this. And the people in the legislature are all hearing. Not one subperson are involved and able to express their feelings. And unfortunately, we were being stuck out and being in the dark a long time. We cannot speak out for years. So at this point, that inclusion is getting worse. And I'm really worried about our children. My children have never been placed in the public school here. I have raised in the public school myself, and I've been here all my life. And I do not want to see my children to do the same thing that I did. So I placed my children in the private school here in Chicago, where they have a special program where they mainstream my kids, but they require all teachers in the classroom to learn sign language. And that is where I can feel confident where I can put my children there. And my both kids did not graduate from ICU here. They graduated from Washington, D.C., because that's the best placement for them. And my son just graduated a couple of weeks ago, and he was mainstream in one of the top schools in D.C. At the same time, able to get into the classroom in the sub program. He was able to socialize himself with other people and yet perform with the group of hearing people. He has a choice. He can pick what he wants, but you should give the children the same choice. They're not given the choice because the hearing people, the legislators, and all the hearing people in the world, all the child is back to the child. I'm telling you it's wrong. I'm very sorry to say this, but I'm a kind of inclusion. Not every child is fit in the program.
Thank you.
I believe she raises a good point that we have got to always in the decision-making process respect the rights and the viewpoint of the parent, and respect the rights and the viewpoint also of the individual with the disability. And we need to do that when we're making the decision. And because she feels that way, I think that we need to work together to assure that her children do receive those services, and that's what the whole process should be like, that we should be doing those decisions together.
I'm going to take a comment from the floor. We have Senator Arthur Berman, who's associated with much of the legislation in this area. I wonder if you have some comments for us, Senator.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I'm finding this very interesting. I sponsored the law that brought Illinois into conformity with the 1975 federal law. We passed that bill in 1979. And the debate that we're having today is the debate that we had in 1979. Some of the words are new, but the feelings are very much the same. I think that when we analyze what is being said here today, we find some very, very important commonality. The needs of the child should be paramount. The services provided to that child should be responsive to the needs of that child. I have argued, whether it be in special education or whether it be in general education, the best investment of any tax dollar is in a quality education, so that you don't have a child who becomes a teenager and then an adult and who needs money because of prisons, or money because of gangs, or money because of continued public aid because of disabilities that prevents that child from becoming a good wage earner and taxpayer. The best investment is a quality education. We have to make sure that our public officials understand the cost and the investment part of what we're doing. That's the only way you're going to be able to translate all of this debate into actual accomplishments on behalf of children.
Thank you. Sharon.
Senator Berman, I have to respond. I totally agree with you. I was a school board member for 8 years in DeKalb, Illinois. We were on your state watch list with a $5.4 million deficit at the time that I was on that school board. And yet we were one of the school districts in the entire country that was most inclusive of all children with disabilities. And we did that at a cost to the school district. We lost, because of the way Illinois funds special education, the way it has attached its teacher certification programs to classroom size, we lost all the years that we have been doing this and are continuing to lose over $200 a year because we are including children with disabilities more than 50% of the time in general education. And that goes to the deep structures. So some of the things have nothing to do with, have everything to do with how the structure of our Illinois system is in how we attach certification to money to classroom size. The children who are being included need no less services. But we have, with that kind of a deficit in our district, we have chosen to meet the letter of the law and to work with families individually to get those supports and aids. We also have, as a result of that, the outcomes for our children with the most significant disabilities is that upon graduation for the last 7 years, every single one of them has been placed in supported employment in our community for no less than 25 hours a time. And that includes a young man who is deaf and blind and self-abusive, has Down syndrome, has cerebral palsy, and has profound mental retardation, and comes from a Spanish-speaking family. And all students that I'm talking about. So if there is, but our school district can't hang on, losing that money for year after year after year, especially in light of how school boards are going today. I see your law as a good law, but I see your regulations as being total disincentives to children attending the same schools as their brothers, sisters, and neighbors and friends would attend, and the same classes as their brothers, sisters, and neighbors and friends would attend. And that's where I think that we have to do a total restructure and look at how we can get families participating all together in the schools that their children with disabilities would attend if they didn't have a disability. That's what I see as the challenge for us in Illinois.